The bone drums had been making loud sounds on the bumpy slopes of the Black Mountains since the evening. Princess Elena Galathinius watched the enemy army all afternoon from her rocky campsite. The army moved like black waves across the mountains, and now that the sun had disappeared a long time ago, the fires of the enemy camp could be seen scattered across the mountains and valley below, looking like a large covering of stars. There are a lot of fires, much more than the fires on her side of the valley. She could hear the prayers of her human soldiers, whether they spoke them out loud or kept them inside, even without using the special gift of her fey ears. She had suggested many ideas herself in the last few hours, but she knew that no one would respond to them. Elena never thought about where she might die and never thought it could be somewhere far away from her homeland, Terrasen, so that her body would not be burned, but eaten by the scary Lord's animals. There wouldn't be a sign to show where a princess of Terrasen had died. None of them would have a marker. "Take a break," a strong man's voice said from outside the tent. Elena turned her head and saw her long, unbraided silver hair getting caught on the detailed leather scales of her armor. However, Gavin was already looking at the two armies below them with a serious look in his eyes, on that thin black line that marks a boundary, which should not be crossed yet. Even though Gavin said he wanted to rest, he hadn't taken off his armor when he went into their tent earlier. Just a few minutes ago, his leaders of war were pushed out of the tent with maps in their hands and no hope. She could smell the fear on them, feeling very sad and hopeless about something. Gavin's footsteps barely made a sound as he walked towards her solitary watch. He was able to move quietly because he had spent many years exploring the wilderness in the southern region. Elena once again had to deal with many enemies shooting at her. He said in a rough voice, "Your dad's army might still succeed, but that's foolish thinking." She could hear every word of the long and intense discussion happening inside the tent behind them. "The valley is dangerous now," Elena commented, and she had brought them all to this place. Gavin did not reply. "At sunrise," Elena continued, "it will be covered in blood." The person in charge of leading the war didn't say anything. Gavin rarely stays quiet. His eyes didn't show any fierceness, and his messy brown hair was hanging flat. She couldn't remember when they last took a bath. Gavin looked at her honestly, like he was able to see her true self, ever since they first met almost a year ago in her father's hall. A long time ago. In the past, everything was very different. The world was full of happiness and brightness, and there was no hint of magic fading away because of Erewhon and his demons. She thought about how much longer Orinth would last once the killing in the south was finished. I wondered if Erewhon would destroy her father's beautiful palace on top of the mountain first, or if he would burn the important royal library, which holds the knowledge and wisdom of our society, and then kill its people by setting them on fire. Gavin said that it is still many hours until dawn, and he looked nervous. "You have enough time to escape. They would completely destroy us before we could get through the mountain passes. We are not the ones." The light from the fire showed the contours of his tanned face. I won't leave these people." She accidentally touched his fingers. Gavin's face stayed still. "We cannot escape tomorrow, or the killing of people by shedding their blood. I know you heard what the messenger said. Aniel is a place where animals are killed for meat. Our friends from the north have left. Your daddy's military is very far away. We will die before the sun is completely up. We will all die at some point in time." "No," Gavin said firmly as he tightened his grip on her hand. "I am going to die. Those people below us, they are going to die, by using a sword or waiting. But," he quickly glanced at her beautifully shaped ears, which she inherited from her father. "You have the potential to live for many, many years, many thousands of years. Don't get rid of it for a battle that is destined to fail. I would rather die tomorrow than live for a long time feeling ashamed like a coward." But Gavin kept looking across the valley. He is the last person standing in the way of Erewhon's army. "Go stand with your father and keep fighting," he said firmly. She felt scared and tried to swallow. It would be pointless. Gavin stared at her, taking his time. "And after all these months, all this time," she admitted, "my father is becoming weaker. He has been near to fading for many decades now. He died where he cannot fight against Erewhon and win. She started this doomed journey months ago." "My life is coming to an end, Elena. You need to come up with a plan to make sure that what you have keeps growing." Gavin's face turned pale. "Do you really have to tell me this right now?" "I'm picking now, Gavin, because I don't have any hope left. Whether I run away tonight or fight tomorrow, the landmass will collapse." Gavin moved closer to the group of 12 tents on the raised area, his buddies, people she knows well. "He said that none of us will be leaving tomorrow." And it was how he spoke, and his eyes were bright, that made her want to hold his hand again. She had never seen him cry, not even once in all the scary and difficult times they went through together. Gavin quietly said that Erewhon will win and become the ruler of this land forever, as well as all other lands. Soldiers woke up and moved in their camp underneath, men and women talking quietly, using bad language and crying. Elena followed where the fear was coming from, all the way on the other side of the valley. One after another, the fires in the camp of the evil lord suddenly disappeared, as if a large dark hand had extinguished them. The bone drums are getting louder. He finally reached. Erewhon himself had arrived to supervise Gavin's army's last defense. "They won't wait until morning," Gavin said, reaching for his sword Damaris. Elena held onto his arm tightly, feeling the strong muscle beneath his armor, which felt as hard as granite. Erewhon had arrived. Maybe her mother's passionate spirit had convinced them. She looked at Gavin's tough, untamed face, the face that she had grown to love more than anyone else's, and she said, "We won't be able to be victorious in this. A fight or struggle between two or more people or groups. And we won't be able to win this war." He felt a strong urge to go to his war leaders, but he showed respect by listening to her. They both had experienced the same thing and learned it through difficult experiences. Elena raised her fingers in the air, using her hand that was not occupied. Her magical powers were making her veins tingle as she felt the energy move from fire to water to a twisting plant, and finally to frozen ice. Not like her father's never-ending dark place, but a versatile, quick, and flexible ability of magic, given by her mom. "We won't succeed in this war," Elena said again, as Gavin's face lit up from the brightness of her untamed strength. "But we can wait a little longer. I am able to reach the other side of the valley within 1 or 2 hours." She closed her hand tightly and stopped using her special abilities. Gavin made a confused face. "You are talking about something that is crazy, Elena. Suicide means intentionally causing one's own death. His assistants will find you before you have a chance to escape." "Sure. Yes, that's correct. They will take me directly to him because he has arrived. They will think of me as their important captive, not their killer. No, a command and a desperate request. If you kill Erewhon, his beasts will become very scared and lose control. Long enough for my dads make our forces come together, join with whatever is left of us, and defeat the enemy armies." "You make it sound like killing Erewhon is easy. He is a powerful ruler, Elena. Even if they take you to him, he will control you completely before you can do anything." She felt her heart tighten, but she managed to say the words. "That's the reason." Her lips couldn't stop trembling. "So that's why I want you to come with me instead of arguing with your people." Gavin just looked at her. "Because I want." She cried as tears rolled down her face. "I want you to help me by diverting my attention away from something else. Can you help me by giving me some extra time to overcome his strong defenses? It's like how the upcoming battle will give us more time." Because Erewhon would choose Gavin as their first target. Once there was a human warrior who had been fighting against the Dark Lord's forces for a long time. They were the only one who dared to confront the Dark Lord when no one else would. However, the Dark Lord named Erewhon despised this human. The prince disliked her father a lot. Gavin looked at her for a while and then gently wiped away her tears. "He cannot die, Elena. You understood what your father's oracle said." She nodded. "I understand. And even if we are able to control him, catch him." Gavin thought about what she said. "You understand that we are passing the responsibility for the war to someone else, to whoever becomes the ruler of these lands in the future. This war is just another part of a long-running game that started a long time ago across the ocean. We are postponing it for someone else to deal with if they are released. And it won't protect those soldiers from being killed tomorrow. Elena said that if we don't do something, there won't be anyone left to continue fighting this war." Gavin looked uncertain. "Even now," she insisted, Our magic is not working as well, and our gods are leaving us. Fleeing from us. We do not have any Fae friends except for those in my dad's army, and their ability, like his, is getting weaker. Maybe when the third part happens, maybe the people playing our game will be changed. Maybe in the future, Fae and humans will fight together and have a lot of strength. Perhaps they will discover a solution to bring this to a conclusion. We're going to lose this fight, Gavin, she said. Our friends will die on a dangerous battlefield tomorrow morning, and we will use this as a way to distract the enemy called Part-01 so that our land, Erilea, can have a better future. His mouth became tight, and his blue eyes opened wide. She said it with a shaky voice, and nobody should find out. Even if we do well, we can't let anyone know about it. He looked really worried. She held his hand more tightly. No one, Gavin, can be rewritten as nobody, Gavin. He looked very pained, but he agreed by nodding to show his approval or understanding. They held hands and looked towards the dark mountains. The Dreadlord's bone drums were making loud banging sounds, like hammers hitting iron. Before long, the noise from the drums would be overshadowed by the sounds of soldiers dying and screaming. Not long after, the fields in the valley would have blood flowing through them. Gavin said, "If we want to do this, we have to go now." He got distracted by the tents nearby. No saying goodbye. No final words. "I'll tell Holdren to take charge tomorrow. He will know what to say to the others." She agreed and nodded, showing that she understood and agreed with him. Gavin let go of her hand and walked quickly towards the tent that was nearest to theirs. He knew that his closest friend and most trusted leader in war would probably be spending his last hours happily with his new wife in that tent. Erilea looked away when Gavin's big shoulders went through the thick flaps. She looked at the fires, looked across the valley, and saw the darkness sitting on the other side. She was certain that it looked at her, certain that she heard the sound of 1,000 sharpening blades as the terrifying monstrous creatures sharpened their razor-sharp claws covered in poison. She looked up at the sky filled with smoke and saw a momentary opening in the smoke where she could see the stars. The ruler of the northern region looked down at her quickly. Maybe the last present that Mala gave to this place, at least during this time. Maybe it's a way to say thank you directly to Erilea, and also say goodbye. Because for the kingdom of Terrasen, for the land of Erilea, Erilea was willing to face the dark danger in the valley and take a risk for everyone's benefit. Erilea said one last prayer to the smoke rising in the valley, hoping that the future children of tonight would forgive her for what she was going to do, as they would have a big responsibility to either ruin or save Erilea. Erilea Lochan struggled to breathe as she climbed the steep hill in the forest. Her throat felt burnt with each gasping breath. Underneath the wet leaves on the ground in Oakwald, there were loose gray stones that made the slope dangerous. The trees were very tall, so if she fell, she wouldn't be able to grab onto any branches. Ignoring the possibility of falling, Erilea quickly climbed over the edge of the rocky top. Her leg hurt as she dropped down onto her knees. The hills covered in trees spread out in all directions, making it feel like being trapped in a never-ending cage. Weeks. The passage is already written in simple words and does not require further simplification. It had been a long time since Manon Blackbeak and her group had abandoned her in the forest. The leader of the group instructed her to go in the northern direction, to locate the queen who is now powerful and grown, and to also find Selena Sardothian, whoever she may be, so that Erilea can repay the debt she owes to Kaltan Rompier. Even after several weeks, she still had nightmares about the last moments in Morath. The guards had tried to force her to be impregnated with Valge offspring, but the wing leader killed them all. Kaltan Rompier took out a strange dark stone from her arm that had been stitched there and told Erilea to give it to Selena Sardothian, just before Kaltan destroyed Morath completely. Erilea touched a dirty and shaking hand to the hard lump in the pocket of her flying outfit that she was still wearing. She was sure she felt a slight pulsation in her body, a rhythm that matched her own fast heartbeat. Erilea was scared in the sunlight that was coming through the green leaves. It was really hot outside during summer, so water became very valuable. Originally, it was the case since the beginning, but now everything about her day, her whole life, revolves around it. Luckily, Oakwald had many streams after the rest of the melted snow from the mountains had flowed down. Sadly, Erilea had to learn through difficult experiences which water was safe to drink. For 3 days, she was very sick with vomiting and fever because she drank dirty water from a still pond. For 3 days, she felt so cold that she thought her bones might break. For 3 days, she cried sadly, feeling hopeless that she would die alone in this never-ending forest and nobody would ever find out. Throughout everything, the stone in her pocket was vibrating and pulsating. In her wild dreams, she was certain she heard it talking softly to her and singing calming songs in languages she didn't think people speak. Could say she hadn't heard it again, but she still had thoughts about it. I wonder if most people would have died. She wondered if she had something good or bad with her as she traveled north, and if this Selena Sardothian knew what to do with it. Kaltain said to tell her that if you have the key, you can open any door. Erilea often examined the shiny black stone whenever she stopped for a short rest. It didn't really look like a key. It was rough and appeared to be made from a big piece of stone. Maybe Kaltain's words were like a puzzle that only the person they were talking to could understand. Erilea took off her light backpack from her shoulders and quickly opened the cloth cover. She had run out of food a week ago, and now she was searching for berries. They were all from different countries, but a faint memory from her time with her nanny, Finola, had advised her to rub them on her wrist first, to check if they caused any response. Mostly, they did too much. But sometimes she would find a bush that had a lot of the right ones hanging down low, and she would eat a lot of them before putting some in her bag. Erilea was fishing inside a colorful canvas bag. She found the last few items and wrapped them in her extra shirt. The shirt became stained with red and purple spots. One small amount of food until she could find more to eat later. She was very hungry, but Erilea only ate half of her food. Perhaps she would discover additional things before she decided to rest for the evening. She didn't know how to hunt. The idea of catching another living thing, like a snapping its neck or hitting its head with a rock, was too much for her. She was not that desperate yet. Maybe, despite her mother's hidden ancestry, it didn't make her a Blackbeak after all. Wiped off the mess on her fingers by using her mouth to remove the juice, dirt, and everything else. She made a hissing sound when she stood up on her stiff and sore legs. She wouldn't survive for long without food, but she couldn't take the chance of going into a village with the money that Manon had given her. She also couldn't go near any of the hunters' campfires that she had seen recently. No. She had already witnessed plenty of kindness and mercy from men. She would always remember when those guards stared at her naked body, and she wondered why her uncle had sold her to Duke Parrington. Erilea winced as she put her backpack on and started walking down the hill. She was careful to avoid the rocks and tree roots. Perhaps she took the wrong way. How would she be able to tell when she had entered Terrasen? And how would she find her queen and the court? Erilea ignored these thoughts and stayed in dark areas while avoiding patches of sunlight. It would only make her more thirsty and hot. Look for water before it gets dark. It is very important, even more important than finding berries. She arrived at the bottom of the hill and felt frustrated by the complicated maze of trees and rocks. It made a sharp bend to the north. She let out a deep breath. "Thank you, Aneth." The Lady of Wise Things had not left her yet. She would keep walking along the stream as much as she could, going towards the north, and then Erilea didn't know exactly how she sensed it. There was nothing unusual in the sense of smell, sight, or sound. The only things that were different were the decaying dirt, the sunlight, the stones, and the sound of leaves rustling above. However, it is there. Her body became stiff, as if a thread in a big tapestry got caught. The noise of the forest suddenly stopped after a short moment. Erilea looked over the hills and the area where the stream flows. The bottom part of an oak tree on the hill closest to us stuck out from the grassy side of the hill, creating a covering of wood and moss over the dried-up stream. Good job. She walked painfully. Her leg was injured and made a barking sound. The stones were noisy and made her ankles hurt. She could almost reach the ends of the roots when she heard the first hollow boom.
No loud noise. No, she would always remember this one specific sound. It also bothered her in her dreams both when she was awake and asleep. The flapping of strong, flexible wings. Wyverns are mythical creatures that resemble dragons. And maybe even more dangerous. The Iron-Teeth witches who controlled them, with extremely sensitive and precise senses like their horses. Allied quickly reached for the shelter of strong tree roots as the flapping of wings approached. The forest was completely quiet, like a graveyard. Rocks and sticks hurt her hands, and her knees were hitting the hard ground as she squeezed herself against the hill and looked through the crisscross of roots at the treetops. One thump, then another very close together. Allied could hear two witches in the forest, although their voices sounded like just an echo to anyone else. She learned during her time in Morith that the Iron-Teeth were instructed to not reveal how many of them there were. They would fly together in a perfect pattern, so that people listening would only hear one wyvern. But these two people, whoever they were not careful or tidy. Or like one of the immortal and dangerous witches. Maybe less important members of a group. Going on a search mission. A frightened voice in her mind said quietly that she was searching for someone. Allied pushed down more on the ground, feeling the roots digging into her back as she watched the top of the trees. And that is the end. A big, fast object moving quickly above the trees, shaking the leaves. A wing made of tough skin, with a bumpy curved point at the end, shimmered in the sunlight. They almost never came out during the day. They always seemed to get it right. One thump, then another very close together. Allied could hear two witches in the forest, although their voices sounded like just an echo to anyone else. She learned during her time in Morith that the Iron-Teeth were instructed to not reveal how many of them there were. They would fly together in a perfect pattern, so that people listening would only hear one wyvern. But these two people, whoever they were not careful or tidy. Or like one of the immortal and dangerous witches. Maybe less important members of a group. Going on a search mission. A frightened voice in her mind said quietly that she was searching for someone. Allied pushed down more on the ground, feeling the roots digging into her back as she watched the top of the trees. And that is the end. A big, fast object moving quickly above the trees, shaking the leaves. A wing made of tough skin, with a bumpy curved point at the end, shimmered in the sunlight. They almost never came out during the day. They always seemed to get it right. I had to look for something valuable or meaningful. Allied was too scared to breathe loudly until she couldn't hear the sound of the wings anymore. The creature was flying directly towards the north, heading towards the Farian Gap, which is where Manon said the other half of the group was staying. Allied only started moving again when the forest's buzzing and chittering noises started up again. Body from side to side. Sitting in the same position for an extended period of time made her muscles feel tight and painful, so she made sounds of discomfort as she extended her legs and arms and moved her body back and forth. Shoulders are the part of your body where your arms connect to. This journey felt like it would never end. She would do anything to have a safe place to live, and some warm food. Possibly, it was worth taking the chance to find them, even if it was just for one night. Walking cautiously along the dry stream, Allied took 2 steps before feeling a strange sensation again. Like a gentle pull, a woman's hand grabbed her shoulder to make her stop. The messy forest buzzed with activity. However, she was aware of it, aware of something being out there. No witches or dragons or monsters. But there was somebody who was observing her. Someone was chasing her. She wanted the witch to teach her how to end someone's life. Lorcan Salvater had been running away from those cursed creatures for 2 whole days now. He did not hold them responsible. The witches were angry when he secretly entered their camp in the middle of the night and killed 3 of them. The sentinels were taken away secretly without them or their horses realizing it, and one of them was pulled into the forest to be asked some questions. It took him 2 hours to make the Yellow Legs witch talk. She was hidden very deep inside a cave, and her screams were muffled. After 2 hours, she started singing for him. 2 groups of witch armies were ready to take over the continent, one in Morith and one in the Farian Gap. The Yellow Legs didn't know about Duke Parrington's power or what Lorcan was looking for. Lorcan was searching for 2 other word keys, which were like the one he already had and kept on a chain around his neck. 3 small pieces of rock were taken from a cursed word gate. Each piece can provide great and dangerous power. And when all 3 special keys were joined together, they could open the gate that connects different worlds, destroy those worlds, or gather their armies. And much, much worse. Lorcan gave the witch the gift of dying quickly. Her sisters were trying to find him for a long time. Lorcan hid in some bushes on a steep hillside. He watched as the girl carefully moved away from the tree roots. He was hiding here before, listening to the noise of her clumsy arrival, and had seen her trip and walk with difficulty when she finally heard what was coming closer to them. She had a delicate body and was small enough that he could have mistaken her for a young girl if it weren't for her full breasts seen under her tight leather outfit. He immediately liked those clothes a lot. The yellow legs were wearing the same clothes as all the other witches. But this girl was just like any other person. And when she looked at him, her dark eyes carefully looked around the forest. She seemed very experienced and knowledgeable for someone so young. At least 18 years old, possibly older. Her face was pale and thin, and it looked dirty. She probably stayed here for a long time, having a hard time finding food. And the knife she was holding shook a lot, which shows that she probably didn't know how to use it. Lorcan stayed hidden and observed her as she looked at the hills, the stream, and the trees above. She had a feeling that he was somewhere nearby. Fascinating when he wanted to stay hidden, only a few people could locate him. All of her muscles were tight, but she completed scanning the gully. She took a deep breath and kept going. Not near him. Every step she took was unsteady. It was possible that she would injure herself when she forcefully moved through the trees. Her long braid hit against her backpack, and her hair was smooth and dark like his own. Darker means something that is not as bright or light in color. Black like the darkness of a night without any stars. The wind changed direction and brought her smell to him. Lorcan breathed it in and used his magical abilities, which he got from his father, to examine and understand it, just like he had been doing for more than 500 years. Human for sure, a human, but he recognized that smell. In the last few months, he killed a lot of creatures that smelled like it. Wow, this worked out well. Maybe a present from the higher power. Someone who can be questioned. But later, after he had an opportunity to learn more about her, find out what makes her vulnerable, Lorcan quietly walked out of the bushes without making any noise. The girl controlled by a demon walked slowly along the stream, holding a knife that was not helpful. She couldn't hold the handle of the knife properly. Okay, and so Lorcan started looking for something or someone. The sound of rain falling on the trees and the misty fog in Oakwold Forest almost covered up the sound of the fast-moving stream flowing through the uneven parts of the land. Aelin Ashriver Galathinius was sitting next to the brook, with her discarded clothes laying on the damp ground. She reached her damaged hand out over the flowing water and allowed the peaceful sound of the morning storm to relax her. The loud sounds of thunder and the bright flashes of lightning had been intense and chaotic since before sunrise. Now, they were becoming less frequent and calming down as Aelin eased her own strong magic power. She took in the cool fog and rain, pulling them deeply into her chest. Her magic flickered weakly, like waking up and then falling back asleep.
Yes, her friends were sleeping near the campsite, and Rowan had created an invisible shield to keep them safe from the storm. They were also kept warm by a cheerful red flame that she had kept lit throughout the night, even though it was summer and usually warm. The challenge was to keep the flame burning while also using the small amount of water her mother had given her. Aelin moved her fingers back and forth over the stream. On the other side of the stream, there was a small rock covered in moss and nestled into the branches of a twisted oak tree. There, a little hand with pale white bones could be seen, stretching and making cracking noises, just like the person watching it. Aelin smiled and spoke softly so that it was hard to hear her over the sound of the stream and rain. She said, "If you have any advice, my friend, I would really like to hear it." She quickly moved her thin fingers back behind the ridge of the rock, which had many symbols and swirls carved into it. Just like many other rocks in this forest, the small creatures had been following them since they entered Terrasen. Edion wanted to go with them whenever they saw big eyes blinking from a tangle of bushes or looking through a group of leaves on one of Oakwald's famous trees. Aelin couldn't see them clearly because they were not close enough. But they had placed small gifts just outside the edge of Rowan's protective shields every night, without anyone noticing who was guarding. One morning, there were many violets in the forest. Aelin had given it to Evangeline, who wore the crown on her red gold hair until it broke. The next day, there were 2 crowns waiting, one for Aelin and a smaller one for the girl with scars. One day, the little folk made a small model of Rowan's hawk shape. They used feathers, acorns, and beetle shells they found. Her Fey prince had been happy when he found it and has kept it in his bag on his horse ever since. Aelin smiled when she remembered something. Even though they knew that the little folk were following them and listening to them, it made things hard. In simpler words, it wasn't really a big deal, but it was less romantic to go into the trees with Rowan knowing that other people were watching. Sometimes, when Edion and Lysandra couldn't handle their intense stare at each other anymore, they found weak reasons to separate Aelin and Rowan for a bit. They would pretend that the lady dropped her non-existent handkerchief far away and they needed more logs for a fire that doesn't need wood. As for the people who currently listened to her, Aelin put her fingers on the stream and relaxed. She calmed her heart and cleared her mind. A small amount of water lifted up from the stream. It was gray and see-through, and she passed it between her fingers like she was weaving something. She turned her hand, looking at her skin through the water and letting it slide down and around her wrist. She told the fairy who was watching from the other side of the big rock, "There isn't really anything interesting to tell your friends, is there?" Wet leaves made a crunching sound as they walked behind her, and Aelin knew it was because Rowan wanted her to know he was coming. "Be cautious, otherwise they might put something damp and chilly in your sleeping bag next time." Aelin let the water go into the stream and then she looked behind her. "Do you think they accept requests?" "Because I would happily give up my kingdom for a relaxing bath at this moment." Rowan's eyes sparkled as she stood up. She brought down the cover she had placed around her to stay dry, which prevented the steam from the hidden fire from mixing with the mist surrounding them. The prince from the Fae lifted his eyebrow in surprise. "Are you talking a lot in the morning worrying?" She looked annoyed and turned towards the rock where the fairy had been watching her poor attempts to learn how to control water. But only wet leaves and swirling fog were left. His hands held onto her waist tightly and pulled her close to him, making her feel warm. Rowan kissed her neck gently, right below her ear. Aelin leaned back into him while he kissed and touched her neck, warming her cold skin. She whispered, "Good morning to you." Rowan's grumble made her toes curl. They didn't have the courage to stay at an inn, even after entering Terrasen 3 days ago. This was because there were still many enemy soldiers watching the roads and bars. Not until there were still many Adarlanian soldiers marching out of her territory, because of the rules made by Dorian, especially when those soldiers might come back here, they might decide to support the monster in Morith instead of their real king. "If you really want to take a bath," Rowan whispered by her neck, "I saw a pool about a quarter mile behind us. You could warm it up, for both of us." She scratched his hands and arms with her nails. "I would cook all the fish and frogs in it. I don't think it would be nice. But at least we would have breakfast made for us." She chuckled quietly, and Rowan's teeth brushed against the delicate area where her neck and shoulder meet. Aelin pressed her fingers into the strong muscles of his forearms, enjoying their power. "The important people won't arrive until the sun goes down." "We have enough time," she said quietly, almost out of breath. When Edion reached the border, he sent messages to a few lords he trusted. He planned a meeting for today in a clearing. Edion had used this clearing for secret rebel meetings for many years. They had come early to check out the area, the problems and benefits. There was no sign of any people left. Edion and the Bane always made sure to remove any proof from being seen by others. Her cousin and his famous group of soldiers had already done a lot to protect Terrasen in the last 10 years. However, they were still being cautious, even with lords who had previously served under her uncle's flag. "Even though it's very tempting," Rowan said, gently biting her ear in a way that distracts her. "I have to go in an hour." She needs to check the area ahead for any possible dangers. Gentle kisses lightly touched her jaw and cheek. "And what I said before is still true. I won't harm you or do anything bad to you the first time we meet near a tree. It wouldn't be next to a tree, it would be inside a pool." A sinister laugh against her skin that was now stinging from the burn. He tried really hard to stop himself from wanting to touch her breasts and ask him to touch, take, and taste them. "You know, I'm beginning to believe that you enjoy causing others pain. Believe me, I also struggle with it." He pulled her closer, making her feel the strong presence pressing against her backside with noticeable urgency. She almost made a noise of displeasure, too. Then Rowan moved back, and she made a sad face because she missed feeling his body heat, and she missed his hands and his mouth. She looked in his direction and saw his green eyes staring at her. She felt a strong and exciting sensation coursing through her body, even more intense than any kind of magic, but he asked, "Why are you speaking so clearly this early?" She responded by sticking out her tongue. "I replaced Edian in keeping watch because Lysandra and Fleetfoot were snoring really loudly and could wake up even the dead." Rowan smiled slightly, but Aelin didn't seem bothered. "I couldn't sleep anyway." He looked at the spot where the necklace was kept under her shirt and the jacket on top of it, and his jaw tightened. "Is the word key causing you any issues?" "No, that's not it." She started wearing the amulet after Evangeline went through her bags and put on the necklace. They only found out because the child came back after washing herself with the amulet of Orinth shown off on her clothes she was wearing while traveling. "I'm grateful they were far away in Oakwald, but Aelin wasn't willing to take any more risks. Especially because Lorcan still thought he had the genuine item. They had not received any communication from the warrior who does not die since he departed from Rifthold. Aelin often thought about how far south he had traveled and if he had discovered that he possessed a counterfeit word key inside a fake amulet of Orinth. If he had found out where the King of Adarlan and Duke Parrington had hidden the other two. Not Parrington anymore, but Erewhon. She felt a cold shiver go down her back, like Morith's shadow had turned into a ghost and lightly touched her spine with its clawed finger. "It's only about this meeting," Aelin said while moving her hand. "Should we have done it in Orinth? Doing it out here in the woods feels secretive and mysterious." Rowan looked towards the north. They still had to wait for one more week before reaching the city, which used to be the center of her kingdom and was very magnificent. In simple words, about this continent. And once they arrived, there would be a never-ending series of meetings and preparations and choices that only she could make. This meeting that Edian set up would only be the beginning of something. Rowan finally said that it's best to go into the city with friends you trust instead of going alone and not knowing what to expect. He smirked at her and glanced at Goldrin, which was tucked behind her, as well as the multiple knives attached to her. "And by the way, I thought secretive and mysterious was your nickname." She responded angrily by making an impolite hand gesture. Edian was very cautious when sending his messages and choosing the meeting place. He made sure to pick a spot that was far away from any potential harm or people who might be watching. And even though he trusted the lords, whom he had introduced her to in the past few weeks, Edian still hadn't told them how many people were in their group or what their abilities were. Just in case means to be prepared for something that might happen or be needed. Despite Aelin having a powerful weapon that could destroy the entire valley and the Staghorn Mountains, it doesn't matter. And that was only her special ability. Rowan was twirling a strand of her hair that had grown very long, almost reaching her breasts. "You're anxious because Erewhon hasn't acted yet." She sucked on her tooth. "Wondering he shall come when the time is right. Is he planning to invite us to attack him? Or is he allowing us to gather our forces, allowing me to return with Edian to retrieve the Bane and build a bigger army, only to enjoy seeing us completely hopeless when we fail?" Rowan stopped moving his fingers in her hair. "You listened to what Edian's messenger said. The explosion destroyed a large part of Morith. He could be restoring himself. No one has admitted responsibility for the explosion. I don't believe in it." You don't believe in anything. She looked directly into his eyes. I believe in you. Rowan gently ran a finger across her face. The rain became very heavy again, and its gentle tapping was the only sound that could be heard for a long way. Aelin stood up on her tiptoes. She could sense Rowan looking at her the whole time. She also noticed how he became very focused, like a predator, when she kissed different parts of his mouth. Gentle, teasing kisses. Created to figure out which one gave in first. Rowan did something. He took a deep breath and held onto her hips tightly, pulling her closer to him. He kissed her deeply, causing her to feel weak in the knees. He gently touched her tongue with his, showing her what he could do in other places. The embers in her blood started to burn. And the moss below them made a hissing sound. When it rained, the water disappeared and became steam. Aelin stopped kissing, breathing heavily. She was happy to see Rowan's chest rising and falling unevenly. This thing between them was very new, and it felt very raw. Completely overwhelming the wanting was just the beginning. Rowan performed a magic song. Maybe that was the strong connection between them, but her magical powers wanted to combine with his. She could tell from the freezing cold look in his eyes that he wanted the same thing as her. Rowan moved closer until their foreheads touched. He said he would do it soon. His voice was gruff and soft. Let's go to a safe place. A place where we can defend ourselves. Because making sure she is safe is always the top priority. He always prioritizes keeping her safe and alive. He had learned it, difficult way. Her heart felt tight, and she moved away slightly to place her hand on his face. Rowan noticed a gentle expression in her eyes and body, and he also felt a gentle side of himself that he rarely showed to others. Her throat was sore from trying to hold back the words. She has loved him for a long time. Longer than she wanted to say. She avoided thinking about whether he had the same feelings. Those things, those wishes, were not considered very important and were placed at the end of a long and violent list of tasks. So Aelin kissed Rowan softly, and he held onto her hips tightly once more. Fireheart, he said, placing his lips on hers. She quietly said, buzzard, into his ear. Rowan found something funny and her laughter echoed in her chest. From the camp, Evangeline asked in a sweet voice, is it time to eat breakfast? Aelin laughed in a funny way. Fleetfoot and Evangeline were gently pushing Lysandra, who was lying down like a ghost leopard near the fire that never goes out. Edion was lying still next to the fire. Just like a big rock. Fleetfoot would probably jump on him soon, Rowan whispered, this is not going to end well. Evangeline shouted, I want food. Fleetfoot replied with a howl right after. Lysandra made an angry face at them, which made the girl and hound quiet down. Rowan laughed once more, and Aelin believed she would never become tired of that laughter. That happy expression on someone's face. He said we should eat breakfast before Evangeline and Fleetfoot searched through everything at the camp. Aelin laughed but looked back at the forest that extended towards the staghorns. Heading towards the lords who were hopeful, as they were traveling towards the south, to make a decision on how to continue with the war and fix their damaged kingdom. When she turned around, Rowan was already halfway to the camp. Evangeline's hair, which was red and gold, could be seen flashing as she ran through the wet trees. She was asking the prince for some toast and eggs. The people she cares about most are her family, and the place she rules over is her kingdom. She felt the northern wind blow through her hair and realized that two dreams she had thought were gone forever were still possible. She would do anything, even harm herself or trade herself for it. Aelin was going to the camp to save Evangeline from eating Rowan's poorly cooked food when she saw something on a big rock across the stream. She jumped across the stream in one jump and carefully examined what the magical creature had left behind. The little wyvern was made with sticks, spider webs, and fish scales. It looked really realistic and had its wings open and its mouth full of sharp teeth, making a loud noise. Aelin left the wyvern where it was, but then she looked towards the south where she saw the old Oakwald River and the Morith Mountains in the distance. Erewhon has returned and is patiently waiting with his group of powerful Iron Teeth witches and Valg foot soldiers. Aelin Galathinius, who is the Queen of Terrasen, was aware that the time was approaching when she would have to show how much she would suffer for Erilea. Edian Ashriver thought that it was helpful to travel with two people who were good at using magic. Particularly during really bad weather. The rain stayed all day while they got ready for the meeting. Rowan had gone north 2 times to follow the Lord's progress, but he hadn't seen or smelled them. Nobody dared to drive on the very muddy Terrasen roads in this weather. But with Renalsbrook with them, Edian was certain they would remain unseen until evening. If the weather hadn't made them late. That was a good opportunity. The loud sound of thunder scared the trees because it was very close. The lightning quickly flashed without stopping, making the wet leaves look shiny. It lit up the world so brightly that it made him, a fae, unable to see clearly. But at least he wasn't wet. And hot. They had stayed away from civilization for a long time, so Edian hadn't seen or kept count of how many people who could use magic had come out of hiding, or who was now able to use their magic again. He had seen a young girl, who was about 9 years old, playing with water at the only fountain in her village. She was making shapes with the water to amuse and please a group of children. Hard, emotionless adults watched quietly from a distance, but they didn't get involved, whether it was for the good or the bad. Edian's messengers had already found out that most people now knew that the King of Adarlan had used his evil powers to control magic for the past 10 years. But still, he didn't think that those who had experienced losing their abilities and the extinction of their group would be willing to show their powers easily. Until his friends and the girl in the square proved it was safe, people didn't like him. A girl who can control water helps make her village and farmland successful. Edian looked unhappy at the sky getting darker, spinning the sword of Orent in his hands without much thought. Even before magic disappeared, there was a particular kind that everyone was afraid of. People who possessed this kind of magic were treated as outcasts or, in extreme cases, killed. Courts from different countries have considered them as spies and assassins for hundreds of years. But in the place where he was, there was a happy and gentle sound. Edian looked at the person he was thinking about. Evangeline was kneeling on a soft mat for sleeping, singing quietly to herself while brushing Lysandra's fur with a gentle brush for horses. It took him a long time to get used to being a ghost leopard. He was very scared because he had spent many years in the Staghorns. But there was Lysandra, with her claws hidden, lying on her stomach while her friend cleaned her. Yes, a spy and killer for sure.
She had a feeling that he was somewhere nearby. Fascinating when he wanted to stay hidden, only a few people could locate him. All of her muscles were tight, but she completed scanning the gully. She took a deep breath and kept going. Not near him. Every step she took was unsteady. It was possible that she would injure herself when she forcefully moved through the trees. Her long braid hit against her backpack, and her hair was smooth and dark like his own. Darker means something that is not as bright or light in color. Black like the darkness of a night without any stars. The wind changed direction and brought her smell to him. Lorcan breathed it in and used his magical abilities, which he got from his father, to examine and understand it, just like he had been doing for more than 500 years. Human for sure, a human, but he recognized that smell.
She gave him back the sword when they left Rifthold and decided to carry Goldrun instead. He had tried to convince her to keep the special sword of Terrasen, but she had said it was better for him to have it. She believed he deserved it more than anyone, even herself. She became quieter as they traveled further north. Maybe traveling for weeks had made her feel tired and drained. After tonight, if the Lords give a good report, he will try to find a calm place for her to rest for a day or two before they continue the last part of the journey to Orent. Edian got up from his crouched position, put away the sword next to the knife that Rowan had given him, and walked over to her. Fleetfoot wagged his tail happily as he sat next to his queen. She suggested that you get a haircut. Yes, his hair was longer than he usually had it. It's almost as long as mine. She made a displeased face. It makes us appear as if we planned it. Edian chuckled, petting the dog's head. I don't see why it would matter. Aelin didn't care much. If you want to wear the same clothes as me, I'm up for it, he said with a smile. The Bane would always remind me of what happened. His army was now staying just outside of Orinth, where he had told them to strengthen the city's defenses and stay there. I will eagerly wait to protect and sacrifice for her. And using the money Aelin planned and killed to get from her past owner this season, they could purchase an army to go after the Bane. Maybe hired soldiers as well. Aelin's eyes lost some of their brightness as she also thought about everything that leading his legion meant. The dangers and expenses, not related to gold, but to people's lives. Edian thought he saw the campfire flicker too. She has killed and battled and almost died repeatedly over the last 10 years. But he knew that she would refuse to send soldiers, including him, to fight. Her first test as queen would be that, more important than anything else. But before we do that, let's talk about this meeting. Do you still remember everything I told you about them? Aelin asked, expressing her disbelief with a straight face. Yes, I remember everything, cousin. She poked him forcefully in the side, exactly where the tattoo that Rowan recently drew on him, which is still healing, is placed. All their names are woven together in a complicated terrasin knot, right next to his heart. Edian felt pain when she poked the tender skin, and he pushed her hand away as she told a story about Murtaugh being a farmer's son, but he married Ren's grandmother. Even though he wasn't born into the Allsbrook family, he still controls the position, even though he wants Ren to take the title. She looked up towards the sky. Darrow is the second richest landowner after me, and what's more, he has control over the remaining lords by being very strategic when dealing with Adarlan during their time of control. She looked at him with anger in her eyes. Edian raised his hands. Is it wrong of me to want to ensure that everything goes well? She casually shrugged, showing no signs of anger or hostility towards him. Darrow was in a romantic relationship with your uncle, he said, while casually stretching his legs. For many years. He has never talked to me about your uncle, but they were very good friends, Aelin. Darrow didn't show his sadness for Orlan's death to everyone, except for what was expected of him as a king's follower. But he changed as a person after that. He is tough now, but still fair. He has done a lot because he loves Orlan and Terrasen very much, and that love never fades. His own actions prevented us from being extremely hungry and poor. Keep in mind this. In fact, Darrow had been balancing between working for the king of Adarlan and working against him for a long time. Understand, she said firmly. He was probably upsetting her with his tone, and it was a warning that he should stop. He had spoken to her about Ren, Murtaugh, and Darrow during their recent journey. Edian knew a lot about their land possessions, like what crops, animals, and products they produced. They also knew about their ancestors and family members who have passed away or are still alive in the last 10 years. But when he asked her about it one more time, he wanted to make sure she understood. He couldn't ignore his gut feelings to make sure everything turned out fine. When there was so much to lose, it was not the right time. From his high branch in the forest, Rowan clicked his beak and flew into the rain, effortlessly gliding through his shield. Edian stood up slowly and looked around the forest, carefully listening for any sounds. Only the sound of rain falling on leaves could be heard in his ears. Lysandra stretched and showed her long teeth, while her thin claws came out and sparkled in the light of the fire, until Rowan said it was safe and there were only the lords present. The safety rules they had made would still apply. Evangeline, just like they showed her, quietly walked over to the fire. The fire opened up like curtains to let her and Fleetfoot pass through to a safe area where she wouldn't get burned. Fleetfoot could tell that the child was scared, so they stayed close together. But it would make their enemies' bones disappear. Aelin quickly looked at Edian without saying anything, and he went to stand on the left side of the fire. Lysandra stood on the bottom side. Aelin looked towards the north but then turned to the west, where Rowan had flown off. A warm, Dry wind blew inside their small space, and tiny flashes of light flickered around Aylin's fingers, which were relaxed by her side. The person held tightly onto Goldrin, a sword with a bright red gem in its handle, which looked as bright as a burning coal. The leaves made noise and the branches broke. A sword called the Sword of Orinth looked shiny and colorful as Aylin held it up in front of her fire. He held the old dagger that Rowan had given him in his other hand, at an angle. Rowan was teaching Edian, and everyone else, about the old ways during these weeks. This is about old customs and rules of the Fae, which are rarely followed anymore, even in Maeve's court. But starting anew in this place and at this moment, they began to fulfill the positions and responsibilities they had chosen and planned for themselves. Rowan came out from the rain looking like a fairy, with his shiny hair stuck to his head and his tattoo clearly visible on his tanned face. There are no lords around. But Rowan had a hunting knife against a young man's throat and walked him towards the fire. The man had dirty and wet clothes with a symbol of a badger, which belonged to Darrow. "A messenger," Rowan said with difficulty. In that moment, Aylin realized she didn't really like surprises. The messenger had big blue eyes, but his face, which was wet from the rain and had freckles, looked peaceful. Consistent while he looked at Lysandra, her teeth were shining in the light of the fire. As Rowan pushed him onward, the sharp knife continued to point towards his throat. Edian nodded his head towards Rowan. He can't deliver the message if someone is threatening him with a knife at his throat. Rowan put down his weapon, but the Fae Prince still had his knife out. The person stayed very close to the man and didn't travel more than 1 foot away. Edian asked, "Where are the people?" The man quickly bowed to her relative. At a nearby tavern, about 4 miles away, General, the person's words stopped when Aylin finally came into view, stepping around the bend of the fire. She made sure it stayed lit up, and she kept Evangeline and Fleetfoot safe inside. The person delivering the message made a quiet sound. He was aware. He noticed how he was looking back and forth between her and Edian, seeing that they had the same eyes and hair color. He realized something. And suddenly, the messenger bent his body down as if he just had an idea. Aylin looked at the man as he looked down. She also saw his neck and how it was wet from the rain. She felt her magic getting stronger. And that thing, that ugly power hanging between her breasts, seemed to awaken an old eye at all the noise. The person delivering the message became still and looked surprised when Lysandra quietly approached. Her small hairs on her face moved as she smelled his wet clothes. He was clever enough to stay motionless. "Did the meeting get cancelled?" Edian asked with a tense tone, as he looked around the woods once more. The man made a pained expression on his face. "No, General, but they want you to go to the bar where they're staying." Edian got annoyed when it started raining. "Please inform Darrow to come out here. He won't die from water." "It's not Lord Darrow," the man said fast. "Lord Murtaugh hasn't been as active this summer. Lord Wren didn't want him to be outside in the dark and rain." Aylin remembered that the old man had traveled quickly across the kingdoms earlier this year. Maybe it had caused damage or had a negative effect. Edian let out a tired breath. "We should go to the tavern and check it out first. The meeting will happen later than they would like it to occur." "Certainly, General, they will think that," the messenger said nervously when he finally saw Evangeline and Fleetfoot protected by the ring of fire. And even though the Fae Prince was next to him holding weapons, and even though the ghost leopard with its claws out was sniffing at him, when he saw Aylin's fire, he became very pale. However, they are waiting and Lord Darrow is getting frustrated. Being outside the walls of Orinth makes him feel nervous. "It makes everyone feel uneasy nowadays," Aylin chuckled quietly. "Yes." Manon Blackbeak stood still at one side of the long, dark bridge that led into Moreth. She observed her grandmother's group of witches coming down from the cloudy sky. Despite the thick smoke from all the forges, you could still easily recognize the High Witch of the Blackbeak Witch clan by her large and black robes. No one else wore the same clothes as the matron. Her group of witches flew down from the thick clouds, staying a good distance away from the leader and the additional person riding next to her huge bull. Manon stayed still and didn't do anything when the wyverns and their riders landed on the dark stones of the courtyard. Manon was ranked 13. The courtyard was on the other side of the bridge. Far beneath, a dirty and damaged river was making a loud noise, competing with the sound of claws scraping against stone and the rustling of wings coming to rest. Her grandma came to Morith. Or what remained, when 1/3 was just destroyed buildings. Astrid took a sharp breath as Manon's grandmother got off her horse with ease, looking angry at the big black castle in front of Manon and her group of 13. Duke Parrington was already waiting in his meeting room, and Manon was sure that his favorite person, Lord Vernon, would try his best to weaken and make her feel unsure in every situation, and was not able to do it. Manon's grandma walked proudly on the big stone bridge. The sound of the river, birds, and busy forges covered up the noise of her steps. Their army is a group of soldiers that work together to protect their country or fight in wars. When Manon saw her grandmother's eyes become white, she lowered her head as a sign of respect. She heard the sound of leather creaking, which meant that the 13 group had done the same thing. When Manon looked up, she saw her grandmother in front of her. Death, who is cruel and sly, was patiently waiting in that gaze filled with specks of gold on the black onyx. "I want to go to the Duke," said the matron as a way of saying hello. Manon noticed that her 13 became rigid. Not at the words, but at the group of witches that are now closely following her. It's very uncommon for them to follow and protect her. But this was a fortress of men, and evil creatures. And she would be staying for a long time, possibly forever, because her grandmother had brought along a lovely, dark-haired young witch who was currently in her bed. The person in charge would be foolish if they didn't take extra precautions. Even if there were always 13, it was sufficient. It should have been sufficient. She tried hard not to use her pointy nails to defend herself from the threat she thought she was facing. Manon politely bent down again and entered through the huge, wide doors to Morith. The 13 moved aside for Manon and the matron as they walked by, then came back together tightly like a dangerous barrier. No opportunities are given, especially when it involves the heir and the matron. Manon walked quietly with her grandmother through the dark halls, followed closely by the 13 and the matron's group. The servants were not around, probably because they were either spying or had a natural feeling not to be seen. The matron talked as they went up the first of many curving staircases towards the Duke's brand new council room. "Is there anything you need to tell me?" "No, grandmother." Manon resisted the temptation to look at the witch, with her silver hair, pale face full of old anger, and decayed teeth always visible. The appearance of the powerful witch who marked Manon's assistant. Who threw Astrid's dead baby witch into the fire, not letting her hold it even once. She was hurt and harmed by someone who then left her alone in the cold snow to die. This person also lied to Manon about it for almost 100 years. Manon was curious about what Astrid was thinking while they were walking. Ever thought about what Sorrel and Vesta were thinking when they found Astrid in the snow? Then made her feel better. And didn't tell Manon about it either. It had never happened before. It looked like a mean thing. "Did you find out who made the explosion?" The matron's long dress flew behind her as they walked down the hallway towards the Duke's meeting room. "No, Grandma," she said firmly. Her grandma quickly looked at her with her shiny black eyes. "How lucky. Wing leader, that you are complaining about the Duke's experiments with breeding, and then the Yellowlegs get burned a few days later." Manon almost said she was glad they were gone. Even though some magic groups were destroyed in the explosion, it's a good thing that the production of the Yellowlegs vowed witches' children has ended. However, Manon could sense her 13 paying attention to her grandmother's back without seeing or hearing anything. And maybe Manon felt afraid. When the matron accused them, her group of 13 people stood firm. Had been drawing for a while. Defiance means to go against or ignore authority or rules. That's how it has been lately. If the powerful witch found out, she would tie Manon to a pole and hit her so hard that her skin would be hanging in pieces. She would make the 13C, to show how powerless they are to protect their leader, and then do the same to them. Maybe throwing water with salt on them after she finished. Then repeat the task every day. Manon calmly said, I heard a rumor that it was the Duke's favorite person, who is not a magical creature. But since she was burned in the fire, nobody can say for certain. I didn't want to talk about rumors and ideas that might not be true. She was strongly connected to him. But it seems like her powerful ability, Shadow Fire, was not connected to him. Shadow Fire is a strong power that could have quickly defeated their enemies when used with the mirror-lined witch towers that the three matrons were building in the Firian Gap. However, since Kaltain was no longer there, the danger of complete destruction was also gone. Even though the Duke doesn't have any other leader after his king died. He said no to the Crown Prince's request to become the ruler. Her grandmother didn't say anything as they kept going. The other person on the board is a prince who used to be controlled by another prince who had sapphire eyes. Currently available without charge. And became friends with that young queen who has golden hair. They arrived at the doors of the council room, and Manon cleared her mind as the expressionless guards opened the heavy doors for them. Manon became very calm when she saw the black glass table and the person standing next to it. Vernon is tall and thin, always has a smirk on his face, and wears green clothes from Terrasen. And a man with golden hair, his skin very pale. The Duke is nowhere to be found. The person they didn't know turned towards them. Even her grandmother hesitated. I wasn't looking at the man's good looks, his strong and well-built body, or the nice black clothes he had on. Look at those shiny golden eyes. Manon has a twin sibling. The Vald Kings have special eyes. Manon checked where they could go out, the openings in the walls, the things she would use to defend themselves when they escaped by fighting. She instinctively moved in front of her grandmother, and her training allowed her to quickly grab 2 knives before the man with golden eyes could react. But the man stared at her with his crooked eyes. He expressed happiness on his face. Wing leader, he turned to her grandmother and nodded. Matron, the voice sounded both sensual and beautiful. Yet also harsh. But the way Vernon looked and the way he talked were off. There was something in his smile that didn't seem genuine, and his normally tanned skin looked unusually pale. Manon demanded to know the identity of the stranger rather than simply asking. The man pointed to the empty seats at the table with a quick movement of his chin. You definitely know who I am, Manon Blackbeak. Parrington in a different body, somehow. Because the strange and horrible thing she had seen in his eyes at times, finally appeared in physical form. The matron's expression revealed that she had already figured it out. He said he got tired of wearing that loose and heavy meat, as he smoothly sat down next to Vernon. A bunch of long and strong fingers. The people who dislike me are aware of my identity. My friends might also want to join. Vernon lowered his head and quietly said, My Lord Erewhon, if it would make you happy, let me bring some drinks for the matron. Her trip has been very long. Manon examined the tall, thin man. He gave them 2 presents. He respected her grandmother and told them the real name of the Duke. Erewhon is a place or object. She was curious about what Ghislaine, who was watching in the hallway, knew about him. The Vald King agreed. The leader of Paranth quickly went to the small table with food against the wall, picked up a jug, and sat down across from the Demon King with Manon and the matron. Respect is something that Vernon never showed, instead he always had a mocking grin. Maybe now that the ruler of Paranth understood the type of dangerous creature controlling him, he was really in need of friends. Maybe someone thought that Manon could have been involved in the explosion. Manon took the cups of water that Vernon gave them, which were made of carved horn, but didn't drink it. Her grandmother didn't either. Erewhon smiled a little while sitting at the table. He did not show any darkness or corruption, almost like he had the ability to keep it hidden and unknown, except for his eyes. Her eyes are the parts of her body that she uses to see things. In simpler words, the rest of the 13 and her grandmother's group stayed in the hall, while only a few of their closest members stayed in the room as the doors were closed again, catching all of them with the Valk King. So, Erewhon said, inspecting them closely in a way that made Manon clench her lips to avoid showing her anger. Are the troops at the Firian Gap ready? Her grandmother nodded briefly. They start moving when the sun goes down. They will arrive in Rifthold in 2 days. Manon was too afraid to move in her chair. You're asking the host to go to the party. Rifthold, the Demon King gave her a suspicious look. I want you to go to Rifthold and reclaim my city. After you are done with your work, the Firian Legion, led by Iskra Yellowlegs, will be stationed there, to the city called Rifthold. They were excited to fight and test their wyverns in battle. They wondered if the enemy knew about their planned attack. A person with no expression on their face gave a smile. Our forces will move very quickly and it will be difficult for anyone to communicate with them. It is not surprising that this information was kept secret until now. Manon impatiently tapped her foot on the floor made of slate. She was eager to start moving and give orders to the others for the preparations. How many Morith groups should I bring with me to the north? Iskra will be part of the second half of our aerial army. I believe only a small group of covens from Morith would be needed. It's a challenge and a way to evaluate. Manon thought about it. I am flying with my 13 and 2 groups of escorts. We don't want our enemies to know exactly how many groups are in our aerial legion or for everyone to go, as I'm confident that even the 13 alone could capture the capital. Erewhon nodded to show he agreed. Her grandmother slightly nodded her head, which was the closest she would ever get to approval. But Manon asked, what happened to the prince? The king replied. King Dorian was the ruler of a kingdom. Her grandmother gave her a disapproving look, but the demon said, I want you to personally bring him to me. She didn't care much about it. There was a big fight. Engage in this battle, and return to the barren lands after it is over. Even if this man, who is called the Demon King, might break his promise. She will handle that later. But before anything else, there is a fight that needs to be started. She could already hear the untamed melody flowing through her veins. The king of demons and his grandmother were talking once more. Manon stopped the sounds of shields clashing and swords sparking for a moment to understand what they were saying. Once we have made sure our capital is safe, I want those boats on the Avery. Have the men of the Silver Lake agreed? Her grandmother carefully looked at the map held down by smooth stones on the glass table. Manon looked where the matron was looking and saw the Silver Lake, which was on the opposite side of the Avery. She also saw a city called Aniel, which was nestled next to the White Fangs. Harrington Erewhon didn't care and showed it by lifting his shoulders up and then down. The person in charge has not chosen to support me or the young king yet. I think that when the word carcinogen is used, it means something that can cause cancer. When he hears that Rifthold has been destroyed, his messengers will come begging at our door. A small smile appears. The place where they live by the lake's waterfall still shows signs of damage from the last time my armies walked through there. I have visited many monuments in Aniel that were built to remember a war. The leader of Aniel will understand how I can easily destroy his city once again. Manon looked at the map once more, ignoring any questions. Ancient the Valk King was very old, which made her feel young. To make her grandmother appear young, like a child. Maybe her grandmother made a mistake by selling them into a partnership with this creature without realizing it. She looked at Erewhon without looking away. The southern half of Adarlan has strongholds in Morith, Rifthold, and Aniel. What is located to the north of the Firian Gap? Or what is located to the south of Adarlan? I am still in charge of Belhaven. The people in power there care too much about money. Melisande looked at the country on the other side of the mountains with the Demon King's golden eyes. Ailwe is destroyed and Fenharrow is in ruins to the east. Melisande should still team up with me because Terrasen doesn't have any money. The king looked towards the north. Aelin Galathinius should be in her seat by now. And when the city of Rifthold disappears, she will also realize that she is very lonely in the north. Brannon's successor has no friends in this land. No longer, but Manon saw how quickly the Demon King glanced at Ailwe, but only for a brief moment. She glanced at her grandma who was quiet but kept a close eye on Manon, giving a warning look that meant serious trouble if she went too far. But Manon told Erewhon, the center of your business is your capital. If I send my large group of soldiers to attack it, you will not have many people on your side. Manon Blackbeak, I last saw you, my group was under my control. Manon stared at Erewhon intensely, even though it made her feel vulnerable. Destroy Rifthold completely, she said calmly. Then powerful leaders like the Lord of Aniel, the Queen of Melisande, or the Lords of Fenharrow might decide it's worth the danger to unite against you. If you destroy your own city, why should anyone trust you when you say you want to be allies? Before we arrive, send a message saying that the King and Queen are enemies to the whole continent. Make sure people see us as people helping Rifthold, not taking it over. If we do that, other leaders will be cautious about teaming up with Terrasen. I will attack the city to show our power, but I won't let the Iron Teeth army destroy it completely. The person with golden eyes thought about it carefully. She knew her grandmother was very close to scratching her nails on Manon's cheek, but she stayed strong and held her shoulders straight. She didn't like or think about the city or its people. Into a catastrophe that will impact the entire world, if the destruction of Rifthold brought together all their enemies, they would be in trouble. And it will take longer for the Blackbeaks to come back to the Wastes. Vernon quickly looked at her eyes. Fear and thinking strategically. He quietly said to Erewhon, the leader of a group has a good idea. Sir. What did Vernon know that she didn't? But Erewhon tilted his head, his golden hair moving over his forehead. That is why I chose you to be my wing leader, Manon Blackbeak, and why Iskra Yellowlegs didn't succeed in getting the position. She felt both disgusted and proud, but she still agreed. One more thing. Can be said as, another thing, or, one additional thing, She stayed immobile, patiently expecting something. The bad ruler relaxed in his chair. There is a see-through wall made of glass in Rifthold. You couldn't possibly miss it. She knew it and sat on top of it, causing significant harm to the city to make people scared and demonstrate our strength. Yet that wall, lower, she asked, why? Her eyes were shining brightly like burning coals. Building is a complex process that requires careful planning and execution. It is important to hire experienced professionals who specialize in demolition. These experts have the necessary knowledge and equipment to safely and efficiently bring down buildings. Attempting to demolish a building without the proper expertise can be dangerous and result in accidents or damage to nearby structures. Therefore, it is highly recommended to rely on qualified demolition professionals for any building demolition projects. Symbols can have the same impact on people's emotional well-being as physical violence. That glass wall is the power of Aelin Galathinius. Mercy means being kind and forgiving towards others who have done something wrong. Manon looked at the person for a while and then nodded. The king quickly moved his chin towards the closed doors, indicating that he wanted them to be closed without saying anything. Manon left the room before he looked back at Vernon. She didn't realize she should have stayed to protect the matron until it was too late. The 13 didn't say anything until they arrived at their own storage area in the army camp below. They didn't even take the chance to speak while getting their weapons ready. Dragons in the new nest. Moving through the thick smoke and darkness that always surrounded Moreth, the two groups of guards chosen by Manon, both of them Blackbeaks, made their way towards their own weapon storages. Okay, now, imagine you are wearing dirty shoes and standing in the wet ground at the bottom of a valley. You can see a rough and old-looking structure made of uneven stones put together. In a place with many forges and tents, Manon gathered her 13 and said, "We will leave in 30 minutes." Blacksmiths and handlers were hurriedly preparing armor for the wyverns tied down behind them. If they were clever or quick, they wouldn't end up in those sharp teeth. Earlier, Asterin's horse, which was sky blue in color, was measuring the man who was standing closest to her. Manon was a little tempted to see if she could provoke a reaction from him. However, she told her group of witches, if we're fortunate, we'll get there before Iskra and show how things will happen during the attack. If we are not present, we go find Iskra and her group when we arrive and stop the killing. Allow me to handle the prince. She was too afraid to look at Asterin while saying it. I'm sure the Yellowlegs will try to take his life. Stop anyone who is brave enough to try to take it. And maybe also stop Iskra completely. Accidents frequently occurred during battles. The 13 nodded their heads to agree. Manon quickly turned her head to look at the armory located under the poorly made canvas tents. She wore heavy protective gear. She smiled widely at them. We want to look our best when we show up. 12 people smiled back at her and went towards the tables and mannequins where they had worked hard to make their armor for the past few months. Manon grabbed Ghislaine's arm while the curly-haired sentinel walked by, and Asterin stayed with Manon. She spoke quietly among the loud noises of forges and dragons. Please tell us what you know about Erewhon. Ghislaine looked pale with her dark skin, and Manon interrupted, saying, just give us a brief explanation. Ghislaine swallowed nervously and nodded while the rest of the group prepared themselves. The person who is both a fighter and a learner spoke very quietly, so only Manon and Asterin could hear. He was one of the 3 vowed kings who came into this world when time first began. The other 2 people were either killed or sent back to their scary world. He got stuck here with only a few soldiers. He ran away to this land after Maeve and Brannon defeated his army, and then spent a long time secretly getting more soldiers, far away in a hidden place called the White Fangs. When Erewhon saw that King Brannon's fire was getting weaker, he decided to attack and take over the continent. According to the story, Brannon was beaten by his daughter and her partner. Asterin laughed scornfully. It looks like the legend is not true. Manon let go of Ghislaine's arm. Be prepared, let others know when you are able to, Ghislaine said as she lowered her head and walked with determination into the arsenal. Manon ignored the look Asterin gave her with narrowed eyes. This was not the right moment for doing this. Rewrite this text using simpler vocabulary, talking. She saw the silent person who makes things out of metal, who is usually next to a hot fire, with sweat running down his dirty forehead. But his eyes were strong and steady as he uncovered her armor by moving the cloth covering it on his work table. Shiny, okay, I'm prepared to rewrite the text using simpler words. The dark metal suit looked like a detailed dragon.